most children who are harmed are usually harmed by someone they know, and there's that element of trust. I just wanted to start writing something, to start venting my personal experiences, and this story started to take shape and it just grew its own legs.
I think we all think we're amateur detectives. Everyone thinks they can, and I think it's human nature, the curiosity of human nature. We all want to solve the mystery. Welcome back to part 2 of my chat with crime fiction novelist, writer and recently retired Queensland police officer Jack Roney. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so part 1, we had you leaving the Queensland Police after 33 years. Describe your exit. Like, did you hand in the gun, hand in the badge, that type of stuff, and then how did you feel after you walked out?
Yeah, as I said, I never thought that would be me, but here I was on that day, and it was very certainly mixed feelings to hand over the gun and the badge and the handcuffs and the utility belt and hand the uniforms back and sign all the forms and to then walk out of police headquarters. Certainly mixed feelings, but I definitely felt a weight had lifted off my shoulders because I had made the decision. It was done. I could live with the decision. I did it on my own terms. I was still very positive about the job that I was doing. It certainly wasn't a case of being negative or bitter and twisted. I loved and was very proud of my career and still am, and still respect the people out there doing the job. But for me, it was just my journey was going in a different direction, and I was just very excited to be able to pursue other interests in life.
And we talked about it off mic, about the fact that you felt that freedom. All of a sudden, you didn't feel owned by an organisation.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose some people may not sort of relate to this, others might, but the sense that you're not just doing a job, it defines who you are, and the organisation it has its clutches in you, it does own you, because you are accountable. Everything you do off duty is also you're very accountable. So you do always, you're constantly looking over your shoulder to make sure that even in my private life, I was coaching sport and running sporting clubs and always making sure that I'm seen to be always or ethical and professional, and that my conduct could never be in question because of the job I do. When I started, publishing books and writing crime fiction, and there's a lot of kind of marketing that you have to do, and you've got to put yourself out there, and to have the freedom to do that without looking over your shoulder and thinking, am I going to get in trouble? Do I have to sign a form to say that I'm doing this and get permission, which I actually had to do while I was still with the police. But not having the need to ask permission to do things anymore was really liberating.
Jack, it's interesting that you say that, because I was so confused when I left, where people would say, could you do this or do that? And I couldn't give an immediate answer. I'm thinking, yeah, I'd like to do that, but I'll just have to check. And then you realise I don't have to check with anyone. I am the person making the decision. But you become so indoctrinated into the police that, if I invited you onto this podcast and you were still a police officer, you'd have to put in a report, you'd have to get it signed off, get passed up the chain of command, and then you might be agreed. It might be agreed, or you might be allowed to come on the podcast. So there is that sense of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a little bit like you. I'm still getting used to that idea of the sense of freedom and being able to make a decision without getting it checked by the bosses. And think, well, yeah, I can do it. There's something you said to me the other day which has resonated with me is I'm so used to being very, very guarded about what I say, because I'm so used to being part of the organisation that I could be judged or in trouble for something I might say publicly. But you said something like, we've earned the right to have an opinion.
Yeah.
So I've been so guarded and protected about voicing my opinions about certain things. Now, I'm...
Well, the way I look at it, and, I might have an opinion and no one might listen to it, but I think I'm entitled to an opinion on things policing, because I've given, over 30 years of my life to policing, the same as you. So when I made that comment, I think, people might listen to our opinions, they might not, but we've earned the right.
Exactly, but that's liberating. We've earned the right, and something I've got to tell myself. You're entitled to voice your opinion. Whereas I've been very guarded, and I would show restraint. Not that I'm one of these outspoken vocal people, but it is liberating to kind of say, as you said, we've earned the right. We've done the tough yards. We've earned the right to have an opinion.
And you understand the organisation. This is not bashing police organisations, because you understand there has to be some command and control. Otherwise, it'd be chaos. If everyone spoke about policing that were in the police, it'd be all over the place. So I do understand it, but yeah, you come to terms with it. But I still sometimes think someone will ask me to do something. I think, it's embedded in you.
Yeah, it is. And the big thing for me was, as we said, that loss or sense of identity. It really starts to get you to question, who am I? Who am I really as a person outside the blue uniform? Because you are judged by the job that you do.
Yeah.
And you get so used to that. And when that's not part of your life anymore, and I used to feel kind of sorry for some of the guys and girls I work with who had nothing else going on outside their job, and no social outwork. I've always played sport and had kept friends outside the job, and you think, well, what have they got to go to once policing is no longer in their life? And I felt very fortunate that I had something to go to. I had personal interests and family support and friends and sport. All these things still gave me some sense of identity, even when I was no longer in the blue uniform.
I agree with that 100%. I think you've got to have a passion or an interest outside of policing, and mine was sport in various forms and different things that I would do, and that kept me balanced. I didn't have a lot of outside of policing. I didn't socialise with police as a general rule, because in a sporting environment or your old friends that you grew up with, I found that they'd always check you or break you out of your seriousness that tends to that dark cloud that forms over you as a police officer with the things you see and do. And it was a good step away from the pressures of policing.
Yeah, those people outside the policing circles keep you grounded. They remind you of who you were before you joined the police, and they remind you of what's important as well. Again, like I've had a lot of friends in the police, and obviously that's healthy.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you need to, because we've all experienced things, and you've got to have your colleagues.
And you can speak to them.
Yes, only your colleagues will probably understand a lot of the things that you go through, but it's definitely healthy to have that outlet and those social connections outside.
They can bring you down. My mates, if a case was solved or whatever, that it wasn't sort of congratulations, they'd be going, that took you 10 years.
Yeah.
So that sort of brings you down. So you're out of the police and the phone's not ringing the whole time, because that's another point that you brought up, and it made me realise that when you are in the police, you can be called at any time. Regardless of where you're working or whatever, they have the right to call you back to duty if something happens. Did you find it was a little bit strange about the phone ring?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that space that you suddenly find yourself in gives you the opportunity to say, right, how am I going to utilise that space? And we're talking about projects that you can work on, things that you've achieved since you've left, and myself with. I've now got the space to be a bit of an entrepreneur and think outside the box and be creative, not only creative in terms of writing, but what am I going to do to market myself, and what are other things I can do? You know, we might talk about some workshops that I've started delivering. Suddenly the sky's the limit as to where your imagination can take you, and I really love that.
Yeah, talk about the workshops, because I think that's interesting what you're doing on that front.
I fell into that. So I've sort of been building my sort of networks with readers and writers, and I kind of love that part of the world. There's such lovely people in the writing and publishing industry. But people started contacting me saying, "Oh, you're a former police officer, and I'm writing a crime manuscript, and I'm stuck on something and some procedural things." And the reality is, if you're a crime fiction writer, amateur writer, and you're wanting to find out this stuff, there's certain things you can't just Google. If you want to immerse yourself into how do coppers talk, the nuances of police culture, all they really know is what they Google or see on TV, but particularly they've been influenced by what they see on American television and American books. So I was starting to see that even Australian authors were getting things confused or getting procedural things wrong because they've been highly influenced by what they see in America. So when people started approaching me and I was having one-on-one conversations and sort of coaching and helping authors, I thought, well, clearly there seems to be a demand. Why don't I just sort of workshop this? And I kind of built this sort of workshop, and it's gone gangbusters. And I've done many workshops at libraries, or sort of community free. I volunteer my time to do it because I feel it's something I can give back. And people are just coming out of the woodwork because they're thinking, I didn't know who to ask. I'm writing this particular crime novel. I got stuck, and they can ask me questions. And during the workshop, I cover some of the mistakes that are being made because we're just being misinformed by what we see on American television.
That's interesting, isn't it? That people, and you don't realise how much knowledge and information you got there, that they think it's you're enlightening them by saying, oh no, you would do this, or if this happened, you'd do that. That type of it's not police methodology, but it's just the culture of it and the way police speak to each other. That type of thing. I've had a lot of opportunities to speak to writers for TV series and that since I've left the police, and some fictional crime writers that are so thankful for my time when you sit down and have a chat with them for an hour. I enjoy it, and I tried to explain to them that in policing, it was difficult to be creative. There were certain areas that you could. I enjoyed sitting down with writers and for TV or fictional crime novels, and explaining the nuances of what policing is all about. What's the attitude when you walk into a crime scene, when you walk into the interview room. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it because they're creative people, and I fed off their energy, and they'd be thanking me. I said, "Don't thank me. I'm enjoying it." Is that the type of response you're getting with the groups that you're lecturing to?
Yeah, definitely. And things that I just thought, I'll say, look, I don't want to teach you to suck eggs, but here's some, I'll share with you some knowledge. And things that I thought people knew, they don't, or they misunderstood it. Things like the policing structure here in Australia. When you look at what happens in the United States, their police departments are structured so differently. They have just under 18,000 law enforcement departments in their country.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And it's the structure is so different. So here in Australia, we have 8 police departments.
Yeah.
You have your state and territory police and your Australian Federal Police. And when I got to travel over America and speak to police over there, they couldn't understand that Australia is a big country, albeit our population is a lot smaller than the USA. But the whole structure, you could be from one end of the state to another and be 3,000 kilometres apart, saying Queensland's a big state, and still be wearing the same uniform and be working for the same police department. Whereas in the United States, if you're working for a county sheriff's department, there could be a sheriff and 8 deputies, and that's a police department. They wear their own uniforms, have their own policies and procedures. In some cases, their own police computer systems that they don't talk to the neighbouring county.
Yeah.
It's a very clunky, in my view, it's a very clunky system. So they have to bring in their federal agencies to help add some cohesion to, if, say, an offender is committing crimes across county lines, they need federal agencies to come in to assist with that, whereas we have a lesser reliance on that. So one of the things I'd often see referenced in Australian books, for example, even on screen, reference to the feds coming in to assist with a homicide investigation, or armed feds jumping out of helicopters to assist with. And I think, no, that wouldn't happen. The state police would do that.
Yeah, just the confusion brought on by the misrepresentation. But even little things like, well, if you're doing an operation, how do you dress? Like, what do you dress for an operation? Where do you carry your gun? Where do you put your gun? That type of thing. And when you've asked those questions, you think this is ridiculous. Like, why would you be asking that? Because you think everyone would know the answers to it, but it's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, and it's the little things. I also had an opportunity, even when I was still with the police, to be an unofficial police consultant there was a television program being filmed in Brisbane, and in my role with police media, they would come to me and they would be asking questions around police procedures, and I would seek that advice, and I'd give that to them. I'm actually doing that. I've been approached tomorrow. I've got another meeting with a screenwriter where I'll be possibly coming on board as a police consultant, similar to what you were talking about, to just, I guess, help them add authenticity to things. It puts a lot of pressure on, because I'm always one of the ones to say, oh, they've got it wrong. You read a book or see things on screen, oh, they've got it wrong. So I've been asked to assist with that. So I hope I'm able to to do the job to their expectations. But it's the little things. It's the conversations. Sometimes I'll look at Australian crime TV shows, and you can't help but think it seems to be a set. It's a TV set. Yep. It doesn't feel like a police station. It doesn't have that kind of feel. The culture, the way police speak, seems a bit contrived and artificial.
It's a police station. A detective's office is not sanitised. There's mess there. There might be one person in the office that decides to keep the desk tidy. The rest have got briefs spread all over the place, and little things like that, isn't it? That pick up on it. You did some, when you were in the police, you actually were awarded a scholarship to go over and study overseas, and you studied in the US and Canada. Tell us about the experiences there. Yeah,
that was a great learning for me. It was a combination of my former role in child protection, and when I was working in the police media unit, my role was to manage the child abduction alert portfolio.
Yep.
And I kind of saw the need that we need to review and look at our procedures, so that it seemed a bit clunky the way we were doing things. So some may know it as an Amber Alert, and Queensland Police have now adopted that terminology.
Can you explain that? Because I think a lot of people wouldn't know what the Amber Alert is.
Yeah, so that's in a case where a child has been abducted or has gone missing in situations where we have grave concerns for the safety, and we need to put a call to arms out to the public to get information and blast information out to the community to try and locate the child. And having secondary alerting partners to assist us in sharing information so that it's on the TV screens, it's on social media, it's on the radios, it's on digital street signs over the highways, and that needs to happen very, very quickly. So my scholarship was to go over to USA and Canada to learn how that is done with their Amber Alert processes. So I had the opportunity. I was over there for a couple of months, and I was kind of embedded with different police departments and was kind of hosted by them and was introduced to their investigators to learn how they do that. Went to different conferences. So I travelled to different locations in Canada. I was in Winnipeg, Toronto, Ottawa, and worked with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Then I went to the US and went to Washington, D.C. and was introduced to an FBI field agent who spoke to me about that process, and South Carolina and Florida. So I came away with some great learnings, and it was also a good cross-pollination opportunity as well for them to learn how we do things here in Australia, because I really feel that how we do things here in Australia, we set best practice. I'm convinced of that. I think Australian policing across the board is very professional. We've probably learnt by the mistakes of others, and I think the way we do things here in Australia is top notch, very professional. So that was
I like the fact you say that, because I think sometimes we've got this little brother attitude that it's overseas, it must be best practices. But I've found our practices stand up very well compared to the FBI, Scotland Yard. We've got some very experienced police.
Exactly. I thought I'd go over there and just be all about learning.
Yeah.
But I also felt there was an opportunity for me to share. Well, this is the way we do things, and things like our structure. I think our structure is far more workable than having just under 18,000 law enforcement departments. Whether it be city police or county sheriff's departments or state troopers or FBI or everything else in between. In my view, that's a bit of a mess. And I think how do they work like that? I think the way we do things here in Australia is far more efficient, and I think we do set the standards in terms of professionalism.
And I agree. I worked over in Canada on an operation over there for a while, working with the Canadian Mounted Police. And they were like their skills, and they had a good reputation, sort of worldwide. And their skills, our skills, were certainly comparable to their skills. But I also found that there's a common language spoke between, because I've done some work over in London too. There's common language between the way police go about their business. Did you find that?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of similarities in the mindset, and it's a universal thing. Clearly, particularly in the likes of the United States, their crime issues and social issues are different to what we experience here in Australia. A lot of similarities, but there are differences. Particularly, so the gun culture is extremely different. Canada had probably more similarities to Australia, given they're also based on the Commonwealth system, and their court systems and the way they're structured is very similar to Australia. So it was good to even draw the comparisons between Canada and US and to learn from their experiences, bring that home with me. And then I was able to then come back to Queensland and introduce my learnings. I was approved to set up a working committee to review our child abduction alert procedures. We took a complete look at the procedures and where are there problems in terms of making it too difficult for officers to make a decision to issue an Amber Alert, to actually hit the go button, and then the processes that enable us to get the information out to the community. So we did a complete review, fixed things that needed fixing.
What year was that, or what years was that?
So I did that research in 2014 and came back, and it was sort of around that 2015, 2016 that we're able to start implementing some of the learnings.
Because I think it was late 2000s, the first time I used an Amber Alert and activated it. A man had stabbed his wife, and she lived, but abducted 3 children and said that the children are going to be killed. And I was called back to lead that investigation. We used the Amber Alert, and it was a terrible 24 hours. We got the children back safely, but at least I felt like we're doing something with the Amber Alert and getting as much notice out there as possible. So I definitely saw the benefits of it.
Yeah, and I was involved in a number of Amber Alerts and having to review statistically. A high percentage of Amber Alerts were actually where the child was taken by someone known to them. And I think there was always this idea that a child is only at risk if they've been abducted by a stranger. But statistically, that doesn't happen very often in Australia at all. Most children who are harmed are usually harmed by someone they know. And there's that element of trust. And so we had situations where a person known to the child had sadly killed themselves and killed the child. So it didn't diminish the risk that those children were in. In fact, it probably heightened the risk. They're more likely to get harmed by someone they know than by being abducted by a complete stranger.
Yeah.
So we needed to factor that in, because I think that prevented us in making a decision around, well, hang on, it's maybe it's a parent, or it's it's a family member. Should we or should we not issue an Amber Alert in this circumstance? But we came to realise, look, that doesn't change anything. We need to look at the risk factors for the child, and if we believe that child could be killed or seriously harmed, we've got to get this alert out, and we need to improve the processes so that there's not too many clunky decisions that have to be made.
And they are big decisions, and you're quite right. When you put it out there, are you pressuring the person into a corner where they're going to harm the children? I actually was involved in negotiating with this person over a phone when we didn't know where he was, and threatening to kill the children. And I remember that there was so many decisions to make in a 24-hour period, and we got the kids back. They were in a different jurisdiction. He managed to get them out of New South Wales, but the pressure that came from that, looking after children's welfare. And
I can only imagine where you've got this hot job and the decisions you make could have a pivotal effect on the outcome.
Yeah, I was speaking to him, negotiating, and whatever you've done, we can smooth it over the usual type of commentary that you would have. And he hung up mid conversation, and for that 20 minutes before we could get him back on the phone, it was probably the longest 20 minutes I ever had in my policing career.
Oh, I can imagine it, and it's such an emotive and volatile situation. Those people are not thinking clearly.
No, and you just say one word wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember I went to a job. I hate using referred to as a job, but that's kind of the terminology. I went to an incident where a woman had killed herself and her 2-year-old child, and that's another incident that really has stuck with me over the years. I remember coming to the scene. I remember the house, and we the father they were separated, so he was an estranged father. He came and found his ex-wife and his daughter deceased, and she'd used carbon monoxide poisoning. And he was in hysterics with his little girl in his arms. Mum was deceased in the car, and we had to intervene and speak to Dad, and that's always stuck with me. So this whole notion that children are only at risk when they get abducted by strangers, they are certainly at high risk if these emotions, and if there was someone who is thinking, well, if I can't have them, you won't.
Yeah,
and,
that's led to so many tragedies, hasn't it? That type of thinking and that type of commentary. Okay, so your fictional detective. How much of you is in that detective?
I think certainly the first book I wrote I poured my heart and soul into it, and I often say that the analogy was I bled those words onto the page, and I think there is a lot of me in that character. So Detective Jarrod O'Connor is my detective that I've created, and he was my voice. Certainly a lot of me was poured into that character and his experiences, and there's certain different incidents that he experiences were real ones that I'd experienced, although I've changed things a little bit for the sake of the fictional story and the overall plot. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of me in those pages.
Is there a risk, like with writing fictional crime and a character, that the character becomes the person you want to be, or is there you got a sense of that? Like I'm a cop, I'm writing about a fictional character. If I make him too much of a superhero, people are going to think, oh, you're a wanker.
Yes.
If I make him flawed, they're going to think, oh, well, it's a reflection on yourself. Is there a fine line?
I think there is a fine line. I probably erred towards the latter, where my detective had some flaws and concerns, and certainly not that cliche of you watch a lot of crime fiction and the cliche detective is broken, alcoholic, disturbed, overwork, alcoholic, workaholic, broken family. And
sit at home eating the cold pizza from last night.
yes, lives alone with their cat.
Yeah.
So I wanted to sort of break that cliche.
I had a dog, Jack.
So I kind of wanted to break that cliche of all detectives are broken people.
Yeah.
That he was a family man, he had support of his family, but he was still it was tearing him apart that he was away from his family so often, and how that was impacting on his kids.
That is definitely more realistic, isn't it? Because we see, and they probably haven't, the fictional detective, that dysfunctional, broken human being, but invariably there's also the family aspect that doesn't play out as easily on the crime type genre.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to try and break that mold. Everything I wanted to do was about making it authentic, believable, immerse the readers into, okay, well, if I'm going to hold your hand and take you through, the eyes. You can see it through the eyes of a real detective, and that was really what I wanted to do, was to really create something that was quite authentic.
What do you think the reason for the interest in crime, whether it be true crime or fictional crime, where do you think the interest comes from?
Yeah, when I run these workshops, I ask that very question: What is it of all the genres that that people read, and people love fiction? You ask any people, I still love true crime, and I watch a lot of true crime shows and podcasts, and because, as they say, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and it can certainly inspire fiction. But I ask that question: why people are drawn particularly to crime fiction, and in all its subcategories? There's cozy mystery, and you've got your heists, armed robberies, or Ocean's 11 type armed robbery, train robberies. You've got your forensic procedurals. You've got your historical ones or futuristic ones, or there's your sleuth is not a police officer, it could be a journalist or a private investigator. There's all these different subcategories of crime. It's a very broad one. Mine is more of I guess it's a police procedural, but I wanted to make my detective kind of personable and believable. Yeah. And people say to me they're drawn to, it's an opportunity to be immersed in something that they would not ordinarily get immersed into. It's that escapism, it's that sense of mystery, suspense, being immersed into a crime scene where there's a homicide, the kind of the duel and the battle between the detective and the killer, and how's it gonna resolve itself? Is the detective going to catch the baddie? It's just that whole mystique of crime that allows people to get, other than watching the news and seeing horrible things on social media. Yeah. Hopefully, crime doesn't affect a lot of people, and it's their way to kind of immerse themselves in that.
Look into a world that most people, fortunately, don't get to see.
Exactly.
But the fascination with the crime. It's I have a theory. I think we all, whether I used to be a detective. I'm not now, but I still think I'm a detective. I think we all think we're amateur detectives. Everyone thinks they can, and I think it's human nature, the curiosity of human nature. We all want to solve the mystery. Yeah. And you would have seen it when you're a cop. You'd be, if you're running a case, have you ever considered this or considered that? And the people have clearly sat on this thought for ages, and they can't wait to tell you because they think they've solved the crime. Yeah, crime readers are very astute people, and if you're going to be a crime writer, you've got to respect your reader, and you've got to challenge them and give them the breadcrumbs, give them the red herrings. Some of them want to be able to try and solve the crime, or some are waiting for the twist at the end. I kind of like to think what I've written is a combination of a whodunit for the first part, then the killer's identity is revealed, then it becomes a cat and mouse game to catch the killer, and a confrontation, and the kind of the relationship between the detective and the killer. Yep. So I kind of really like creating that sense of suspense, and I just find it really challenging. It makes it more interesting. Tell me, when you start to write a book, have you got a rough framework of where it starts, how it's going to flow, and what the ending is? Or do you just start off with a chapter and then see where it takes you? I'm probably more of a planner. They say there's two different types of writers. There's planners or plotters who do like to pre-plan and have a script and kind of storyboard out their story, versus pantsers, who are people that just make it up. They make shit up as they go. I can never do that. I'm probably a bit of a combination of both, though. What I'll do is I'll storyboard what I think needs to happen for this chapter. Again, if it's more of a complex plot, you do have to put a lot of thought into it.
thinking about how's it going to end. You want to create an ending that's climactic and suspenseful and satisfying for the reader as well, because they've got high expectations from these crime stories. So there's a lot of pressure to get it right. So I do spend a lot of time plotting, but then when I get to that chapter, I will then sit down and start to be more creative and flesh out what needs to occur in terms of dialogue and that sort of thing.
So the storyboard, my experience, and I think this is what you're talking about. There was a writer from LA that came over to catch up with me and another police officer or ex-police officer writing a movie, and hired a motel room, put us up in the motel room, and we spent 2 days with him putting post-it notes all around the room. Or sticking up A4 pieces of paper, writing, okay, scene 1, this. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So having a skeleton of the direction of your story. At the moment, I'm writing a new story where it's 2 concurrent timelines. There's a murder occurred in 1988, and then every alternate chapter, it's jumping to the present day where there's a female detective and she's trying to uncover secrets that were being kept around what really happened in 1988. So I'm bouncing between past and present.
That's a harder form of writing than in the cops we sit down and do a fact sheet. Like a fact sheet is this started, blah 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 blah, done. That must be a harder way of writing.
Yeah, it's sometimes you have to follow a chronological sequence. Sometimes you got to almost work backwards. You know where your story is going to, or where you think it's going to go to, and you got to work your way backwards. What I'm doing with this at the moment, I'm just focusing on the 1988 timeline to begin with, because if I'm, as a writer, I'm bouncing between the two, I'm just going to confuse myself. So I want to bed down that storyline first, and then I'll write the present day story, and then I'll start to merge the two so that they do eventually dovetail at the end of the story.
Okay. Where do you do your writing? Have you got a special place? You go to an office in the house, or is there somewhere where your creative juices flow?
I do now have a home office. I'm a Star Wars tragic, so if you sit down at my desk, there's all my Star Wars action figures that I collected as a kid. And
I expect that I've heard some surprises on this podcast. Really?
Yeah. So I've got my little, I've got my space. I've got all the memorabilia and stuff that's there, and I can sit and look and ponder.
Who's your favourite, Luke or Darth Vader, or?
Oh, yeah, that whole dynamic between Luke and Darth Vader. So, yeah, I've got my own space, so I had that space at home. But I wrote a book called The Ghost Train and the Scarlet Moon. It's a historical mystery with a twist of time travel, completely different to the crime series that I've written. I wrote that predominantly on a train, commuting to work. So at the time, COVID had hit us hard.
Yeah.
I was still having to travel to work. I was still one of the essential workers, and I was still travelling. I was actually working in the command operations centre, the COVID command operations centre at the time. Incredibly busy, but I had this story that I just had to tell. It was bursting out of me. So I actually wrote that. They talk about if you're busy, you'll never find the time to write. But if it's in your heart and you just feel you need to write it, you will find the time. So every day I had a 30-minute commute on the train. I had a little tiny laptop on my knees, and I wrote this 80,000 word manuscript with 1 hour a day travelling to and from work on the train. So I could have wasted my time social media on my phone. That was my time, and it took me probably 6 months, but I got it written.
Wow. Writer's block. Do you get those days where you sit down and it's just not flowing?
Yeah, you do. I find the best way to resolve that is just to take a break and do some reading, and sometimes by just letting your brain calm. Do some reading to fuel your body back up. You fuel your creativity back up again.
Yeah.
You come back, reread what you've written, and suddenly something will inspire you. I think as a writer, you become an observer of the world. I spent a lot of time thinking, not saying much. I spent a lot of time watching, and you draw ideas from the world, and then suddenly it'll just pop.
One thing I found in the books that I've written, and one, I Catch Killers, is virtually a memoir. I did it with a co-writer, Dan Box, and who's sitting here closely, so I better be nice. What I found, and what I found really interesting in writing that, I've come from a policing factual, this is the report, this is what's happened, to writing, okay, this is my sort of life story, or this is my journey through the police. And he would be at pains when I'd be describing something, or I'd write something down, and he'd come back and go, well, what colour were the bricks on the house? I go, oh, I don't know, red, brown, does it really matter? It was a house in this street at that address. Like, that was my police thinking. And then I learnt we've got to be more descriptive. And it's a lesson that I learnt, and it's sort of carried on from the type of writing I'm doing now, that you need to create that vision and take the reader into that world. Is that something that you had to train yourself to do, writing? Like, when you were writing, you're still in the police, so you're going from one form of writing to another. Did you find that difficult?
Yeah, like you, I was always a good writer in terms of writing
reports,
court briefs
facts,
and reports,
yeah.
and very factual,
Yeah.
government style, police style reports. So I've done a lot of writing over the years, but creative writing is a different beast altogether, and it's about immersing your readers into an environment, and it's painting a picture with words. You don't want to have too much prose and make it too convoluted. If it's an action scene, it's got to be short, sharp, and it's got to progress very quickly. You don't want to stop and describe things in the middle of an action scene. But you've got to find that balance between that and pushing your story forward, but still immersing your readers in the scene and the setting. They often talk about the setting. Is another character in your book. So if it's an outback town where it's drought-stricken, or it's in a rainforest, or whatever, it's a smoggy city where it's rainy and cold, that plays a significant part in the storytelling.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's definitely a skill to it. You've probably read it. I've had one experience at fictional crime writing, and I'm joking when I say you've probably read it. It was through the Australian newspaper, and it was a book called Oh Matilda, Who the Bloody Hell Killed Her? And what it was, and I'm taking the piss out of myself here, some renowned writers from across the country, including Thomas Keneally and Trent Dalton,
yes.
So some big names,
yep.
And myself, of course, in that. They started off, I think it was Carolyn Overton wrote the first chapter, and then the next writer has 3 days to write the second chapter, and it had to build on from that. I came in at about the 8th or 9th chapter. And it was handed to me, and I've never been so stressed in all my life, because I'm thinking, look, these people can actually write, and this wasn't long after I was out of the police. What am I going to do? And so I read it, and I'm starting to write down, okay, that might be a suspect. There's a witness, and very factual. And then it just dawned on me, this is fiction. I can take this wherever I wanted. Using some of my experiences from policing to create the realism, but there felt like a freedom having years and years of doing fact sheets and reports that have to be very sequential and very detailed in the facts. You had the freedom to take it where you wanted to, and I quite enjoyed it.
It's thoroughly enjoyable, and you just do not know what's going to pour out of you until you physically sit down and start writing.
Yeah.
You can sit and be thinking about what you're going to be writing about, but the moment you physically start writing, you just unlock something in your brain, and it will begin to flow.
I can see when you're just sitting here talking that it energises you. You're enjoying it.
Oh, I love it. It gives me a sense of purpose, and it's my way to, it's my legacy. Hopefully if people like my books, I'm still telling a good yarn. I'm telling a little bit about myself and my own experiences, and trying to tell a truthful story about the world and policing. And hopefully, they'll still be around.
You've got 3 books in the series at this stage. Do you want to just, without giving away the plot, just the breakup of the books and how it flowed onto a 3-book series?
So when I wrote the first book, it was a work in progress for probably 20 years, and it was kind of just my way to start.
And that's this book, The Angels Wept.
Yes, so that's the book called The Angels Wept. Is book 1. I never had any thoughts of where it was going to lead me. Or the fact that it was going to be part of a series. But when I wrote it, it was just my way of, as I said, I just wanted to start writing something, to start venting my personal experiences. And this story started to take shape, and it just grew its own legs. And when I finished it and then had it edited, and years later finally got it published, I felt that the story of Jarrod O'Connor, he had more stories to tell. So I then started thinking, how can I raise the ante and come up with more? So he's a child protection detective in a country town. He's investigating this homicide, forming a bond with these kids who witnessed a homicide. But all the other elements, there's forming a bond with some local street kids, and his rapport with them becomes very crucial. And all these things I drew from my own experiences. When I got into book 2, I just wanted to really focus more on having a really engaging story. how can I improve myself as a writer and tell a really good yarn? So I continued on with those themes, and he's having to experience a serial killer comes in, and there's also elements of child exploitation online and how that creeps into the underworld of child exploitation. And then I ended up writing a book 3, and I just felt there was still too much going on, too many loose ends from book 2 that I needed to push on, and before I knew it, book 3 had been written.
Well, you really made the transition. You've only been out of the police since October last year, so we're looking at sort of 8 months, roughly.
Yeah, although I have been tinkering sort of covertly for
on the train.
On the train.
If people get on the train, there's this weirdo just sitting there typing away up and down. Is that where you're writing all these books?
It may well be me. Yeah. So it's been a journey for a number of years, to the point that I finally had the courage to kind of say, well, it is what it is. You know, haters are going to be haters, and but as I said, people are overwhelmingly supportive. People that I didn't think would be supportive, particularly within the police circles, have been incredibly supportive. So it's been great.
Talk me through that. Why didn't you think the police would be supportive of it?
I guess it's just that notion of perceptions. You're bit of a wanker writing crime fiction as a serving police officer. You're living and working the reality. Why do you need to be writing crime fiction?
Yeah.
And so I just didn't know what people would think of that. But the feedback has been, oh, it's really cool. I can't wait to read your stories, and I wish I could do the same thing. And it's just been the support has been overwhelming.
Well, I think there needs to be some credit and acknowledgement of the fact that you've someone, and we all talk about it, but someone's actually followed their passion and dreams. And you've done the hard yards in the policing, but you saw something more in your life, and you're actually doing it. So full credit to you.
Yeah, thanks. It was certainly a big decision. I finally had to, as I said, my wife said, grow a set of balls and make a decision. So I did.
That's important, isn't it? Having a supportive partner that's sort of pushing you out the door and said, "I'm sick of hearing you whinge about it. Go out and do it."
Exactly. Yeah. And so with that support, I've now had the opportunity to pursue my dreams, and the planets are starting to align.
Wow. What else have you got? What else are you occupying your time with? Is there time for anything else?
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm trying to do some new writing, because we've got 4 books in the can now. So my 3-book crime series we're looking at sort of drip feeding those out and all the marketing around that, working with my publisher. I give my publisher a plug, Hawkeye Publishing in Brisbane, fantastic publishing house in Brisbane. So there's all the marketing and speaking events that go with that. But I'm also enjoying these workshops that I've started delivering at libraries, sort of community workshops for writers, where I'm sharing my policing experience to help people who are writing crime fiction. I've done face-to-face workshops and some online workshops, and also working with authors one-on-one, doing coaching for people who might be sort of emerging crime writers, and they just want some help with getting some procedural information correct. I can work with those people. So really, between all that, it's been keeping me very busy.
Well, it seems to be working, because I'll tell you, and I don't think I've covered this with you, that how I became aware of what you were doing and who you were. It was from recommendation from the Sunshine Coast, where you'd done a talk, and this person got in contact with me and said, "You have got to have this guy on the podcast. Fit perfectly." And I think she was right too.
Oh well, thank you. And as I said, I certainly had anxieties about imposter syndrome coming on your show, given the high profile guests you have. So it was good to get that.
And then you saw me and realised there's nothing to worry about.
Not at all.
Look, I've really enjoyed the chat, and I want to thank you for your work in the police too. And child protection is one of the hardest sections in the police you can work, and you put in the years there, and it comes at a cost. You identified the cost, but you made the necessary changes. So, and I like someone that's actually pursuing a passion. I think it's good. You've energised me just listening to someone following a dream. So good stuff.
Yeah, look, life is short. I do get that sometimes financial restraints can make it difficult. I'm a realist.
You're not one of those people. Just follow your dream. Don't worry about the money.
No, you still got to feed your kids and pay your bills. And fortunately, because I'm still working, I'm still earning an income.
Yeah.
It's given me the space and freedom to do this. So if you're able to, you have to remind yourself life is short. And they say, I remember reading somewhere where there was some nurses who worked in the unit in intensive care where people are about to die. Can't remember the name.
ICU or
ICU. and people who are sort of have terminal illnesses.
Oh, right. Yep.
Will often say, palliative care is the word I was looking for. People in palliative care who know that they're dying, and one of the most common things that they say is that they regret not following what gives them joy in life or gives them a sense of purpose, and that's I felt, well, something's telling me that there's something I can do here, and I need to pursue my dream. So I've given it a crack.
That's good, wise advice. If people are interested in your workshops and that, how can they source that?
Yeah, so most information about me is at my website, jackroney.com.au. I'm on all the social media, Instagram and Facebook, so feel free to check me out and connect there. I'm certainly really keen to connect with other writers around Australia, particularly those who are interested in crime writing, and happy to engage with people.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Garrett. It's been my pleasure.
Cheers.